So it's not very, very often we, shall we say, get to respond to a minister who does something absolutely ridiculous. Of course, Liz Truss currently, again, if you believe the polling from Conservative Home, which again, to be honest, I have every reason to believe that is correct. She is currently like the golden girl of the Conservative Party. She is the cabinet minister who has the highest approval rating amongst Conservative voters, and a lot of Conservative voters, again, a couple of times when they've done this, as to who they would like as a replacement to Boris Johnson. Liz Truss is normally at least in pole position, if not second. So get ready, of course, as I've said before, if Boris Johnson should ever go or even leave, there is going to be an absolute knife fight to determine who is at the top of that poll. And I have very much confidence. I have a lot of confidence in saying that Liz Truss will ultimately probably one of those people competing to take Boris's seat, probably along with Priti Patel, Michael Gove, and Rishi Sunak. And probably maybe Dominic Raab. I don't know. We'll have to see. But like I say, when that happens, it's going to be interesting. It's certainly going to be fun. But today we're going to be talking about Liz Truss's comments about how apparently our EU membership has created a defensive and outdated trade attitude. Yet, when you look at the EU, not only is it only very, very progressive, every single economist out there will tell you that the EU is probably the future for a lot of countries when it comes to trade blocs and trade power. Pooling collective sovereignty is the way forward, as is, for example, the TTP, which again, we are apparently wanting to join. So, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So this comes from the London Economic, and the title is Liz Truss, EU membership created defensive, outdated trade attitude. So, some businesses and government employees remain defensive about trade as a result of the UK spending nearly 50 years in the European Union, Liz Truss said. It's not a defensive, it's that they're our closest market. And us leaving that market is going to have consequences, as we are already seeing. And the idea that we can, as it has been said before, that we can replace that loss of trade by leaving that single market with all the trade deals from other countries is already proving to be false. And yes, obviously the coronavirus is obviously a thing as well, but the very fact that we've had so much of that is absolutely very alarming. And she gets into more of this speech, which, well, shall we say, definitely points to some interesting future and more about worrying why we should be worrying about that Australian trade deal. So in a speech on Tuesday, the International Trade Secretary set out how Britain's UK's post-Brexit trade strategy will be increasingly about attempting to try and secure businesses with Eastern growth markets in India and elsewhere. Except the problem is, Liz, they're halfway around the world. You know, it's not that easy. You can't just go, we're going to do a trade deal with India. Yeah, it's not just us doing a trade deal. It's what we have to give up in return and what comes flooding into this country. Like I say, these trade deals that they're trying to do are, of course, as a reminder, a two-way street. And believe it or not, we have a very, very weakened position because we are absolutely desperate to sign these trade deals. The Australian trade deal, the New Zealand trade deal has been done at literally a 100-meter sprint dash. And we have every reason to worry from what we've already seen from the Japan trade deal, from the Norway debacle trade deal that went on a couple of weeks ago, from some of these rollout trade deals. Things aren't looking good. Things are not looking good. So in order to get those opportunities, we have to, quote, jettison some of our outdated assumptions and attitudes, she added. What are these outdated assumptions and attitudes, you might ask? So when later asked to elaborate on her comments, Truss said, "We have spent 50 years in the EU, and it is natural that whether it's business or whether it's people employed by the government and others, there are certain ideas that have been shared and propagated and are still present in some quarters. What I want to do is move on forward from this defensive mindset, which says, what do we lose, to the to the offensive mindset, in which he's saying, here is what we can gain. Sometimes there can be a lack of self-belief." Belief does not get you a good trade deal. Belief has nothing to do in a trade deal. This idea of being defensive is completely acceptable in any negotiation. And the idea that we should just say, ignore what we lose versus, quote, what we could gain, is a very dangerous attitude, because you could be opening up the economy to some very dangerous trade deals. You could be opening up the economy, for example, for India to just start dumping loads and loads of its products here on UK shores, which would mean that UK domestic manufacturers or even producers would be absolutely outcompeted by a foreign import, which would have a knock-on effect, which would mean less jobs here. That's literally what she's advocating for, which is, again, why we should be incredibly worried about some of these trade deals coming forward. So addressing the policy, and again, by the way, that's still not getting to the point of what these outdated assumptions and attitudes are. That's some of them, but again, doesn't really explain it all completely. So, addressing the policy exchange think tank, Truss said that Britain faced a choice between embracing opportunities in growth markets or staying in our comfort zone. She said protectionism would not increase living standards, and trade was needed to curb rising inflation through the power of economic openness. That sort of means nothing. Protectionism in itself can increase living standards, because if you have a protectionist attitude, that means that you are going to essentially protect your domestic manufacturers and your domestic market, which every country in the world operates in, even the EU. Again, one of the big Brexiteer complaints was, oh, the EU's too protectionist. Oh, the EU's too protectionist. When in reality, what they were really meant was, we don't like the EU regulations, which means that we can save an extra £100,000 cutting corners here, there, and everywhere. That's what they really meant. Like I say, they have no idea what it means when it comes to being protectionist. And again, protectionism can be quite a good thing sometimes on some industries. So when asked, when the government drew the line between trade and human rights in relation to China, Truss said the country was, quote, a very important trading partner. So essentially, be prepared to just say, we don't mind your human rights record, we'll do a trade deal with you. Congratulations, Truss. Typical, Tory moral backbone of saying one thing while doing something else. But She said that trade with China must be, quote, reliable, stable, and in accordance with international rules. I talked about how important it is that trade we do underpins our values of free enterprise and democracy, Truss added. We've left one of the biggest areas of that trust. You do realize that. Yet, apparently, we are not seeking to get a good deal or even improve upon the deal. Might be a starting point. The Department for International Trade's Global Trade Outlook report, published on Tuesday, has found that the center of global economic gravity is moving away from Europe and heading towards the Indo-Pacific. By 2023, 3 of the 4 largest economies in the world will be the Indo-Pacific region, and report forecasts with the region set to account for 50% of global growth in the GDP and about 44% of global import demand over the next 30 years. We are not in the Pacific. We are in Europe. If these countries grow in economic size and importance, then our our singleness, shall we say, will be at a massive disadvantage. And more of these markets, by the way, economic groupings are forming. It's not just the Pacific Partnership. There is the Caribbean Union. There's the South American one. There's one in South Africa. There's a Middle African Union. They are forming all over the place because countries are starting to realize that they can get a better deal and better trade if they group together and pool their economic muscles together. And as I've said before, what advantage, or shall we say, what leverage do we have to get some of these Pacific countries to accept more of our exports and trade? Don't really have a lot of pull in those areas. So alongside that, global demand for British digital and financial services is expected to double in the next decade, with the demand for digital services calculated to grow to about 117%, the department said. So that's digital services. What about manufacturing? Because that's quite important. You can't just rely on like a country just running one thing. And this comes to the Tory short-sightedness. They're looking at these numbers really greedily and going, "Oh, that'll be good. That'll be good. Let's have a bit of that. Oh, nom 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 nom." But they're not looking at the long-term view of what impacts these trade agreements are going to have on our own country. Some of these are not going to have some very good, shall we say, impacts on us. Like I mentioned before about these countries just dumping a load of very cheap products on our shores. How are we going to stop that? Truss said that we are, quote, building a global network for the next generation of trade deals that are the advanced in services and digital trade, and forcing a closer economic ties with markets in East Asia and the Asia Pacific. So this is where it gets fun, because as this develops, of course, the EU is also going to go into these markets, and it's going to be hilarious. It is going to be hilarious when we see the EU get these trade deals, and they are going to make our trade deal that we got with them look absolutely piddly in comparison. Like I'm waiting for that, because when those comparisons come, it's going to be here's our tiny little trade deal, isn't it good? And then you've got that other child who's got the massive trophy. Said, look at the trophy we've got. That's the true position we're going to be in. But yeah, we've talked about this numerous times before. Liz Truss is setting up this country for some massive pitfalls in the future, massively. And the deals we are set to see, like I say, in the next couple of months, we are expected to see the Australian trade deal And someone said, "Oh yeah, the Australian trade deal is going to be hidden behind closed doors." No, they can't hide it. The government literally cannot hide it. They again, because of how the vote in Parliament went, they are allowed to do the trade deal behind closed doors. But once it's signed, it then becomes part of the government. And all it would take, even if Liz Truss were to try and hide it, would be a Freedom of Information Act, and then Truss would have to come forward with it. So they literally cannot hide it. They cannot hide the damage that this is going to be done away. And once that ink is signed on the dotted line, well, who knows what we're going to have given up? Because again, saying what we've given up is just as important as finding out, well, what are these quote unquote opportunities? And again, Brexiteers can't really lay out the so-called opportunities. Yeah, okay, it's a really fast-growing region, but guess what? Every single economist has stated it very, very clear. It is only those economies in the Indo-Pacific that are going to improve on that. We're not in the Indo-Pacific. We're not, Britain is not suddenly going to just come up, sail away, sail its way around down the Atlantic, round the Cape, and end up somewhere just off, the coast of India. That's not going to happen. But they seem to think, again, distance in trade matters so much. And these countries on the other side of the world, but they don't understand that. But of course, as always, Brexiteer fantasies will eventually come down when it is shot down by the crude flat guns of reality. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee Week. And well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you all